Hello, everyone, and welcome to SNS's Top 10 Predictions for 2022. I'm Barrett Anderson. I'm the COO of Strategic News Service and Future in Review. And we are so delighted to be here with you today to talk about Mark Anderson, our CEO's predictions for the year ahead. A few notes of housekeeping before we get started. We are using Zoom as a platform. We do not recommend it for your personal secure meetings for reasons I believe as SNS members you're probably aware of. Please keep yourself muted during this session. We are recording this and we'll send it out to all of our attendees afterwards. So you will get a recording of this in your inbox tomorrow. The session is on the record. And if you have a question, please drop it in the chat. Which is in Zoom. I will go through at the end of Mark's predictions and call on folks who have put questions in the chat. And you will at that point unmute. We are trusting you to be question askers and not extremely long commenters so that we have time to get to everyone's questions. But you are a smart audience and a great group, and I feel confident that you can rise to the occasion. This session is on the record. I know we have a few members of the press here today, and my only ask is that if you are interested in quoting anyone's questions, you first get their permission before attributing the question to them, because they have not agreed to be a public figure yet. But anything Mark says is on the record. You're welcome to quote him. So a little bit about SNS, for those of you who are not familiar. We were started in 1995, and our global report is the world's most reliable source of advanced information at the intersection of technology and the global economy. We have been making predictions for a very long time. We are read by Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, many others, and we also publish a series of books, one of which is called The Pattern Future. And if you're interested in learning more about how to make predictions or how we think about making predictions, I highly recommend that you read that. That's written by Mark. Since he started making predictions in 1998, Mark has maintained a 95.1% public accuracy rating. So I highly recommend that you pay close attention to what he has to say here today. 18 years ago, we started Future in Review, the FIRE conference, which The Economist calls the best technology conference in the world. It is a powerful gathering of leaders in technology, business, and beyond, dedicated to solving global problems. And this year's conference is virtual. It is taking place February 28th to March 4th. And I am very excited to let you all know that we have just launched our full agenda. So I'm going to give you a brief look at that before we get started. One moment. So as I mentioned, it is a virtual show this year. There's still a lot going on with COVID, and our whole audience is all over the world. So we decided not to tempt fate and ask people to fly from everywhere and beyond to be in the same room as each other. It's always good when you don't accidentally kill the world's leading innovators in technology and science. But a few of our speakers, top speakers this year, Angela Sheffield, who is a senior program manager at the Office of Proliferation Detection at the Department of Energy, will be talking about the future of AI and defense. Carver Mead, the creator of neuromorphic computing, will be talking about the influence of biology in chip design. Dalia Kirschbaum, who heads up NASA's Hydrological Sciences Laboratory, will be talking about water levels around the world and what to anticipate and think about those. Craig Venter will be talking about the Earth's microbiome and how that relates to our future as a society. Josh Rogan will be joining us from Washington Post, CNN, to talk about protecting the United States and around the world, other countries around the world from China, disengagement from specific Chinese policies and institutions. We have a huge number of people. There's way more. If you go to fire.futureinreview.com, you can see all of our speakers, all of the agenda items that we have confirmed so far. We will be adding more. I think this is actually our best FIRE yet, because we are able to bring people from around the world. It's going to be a fantastic conference. And in contrast to past years, we will also be including a full day focused on advanced AI in partnership with Pattern Computer, which is a huge deal. We've got some incredible speakers coming in with help and support from the Pattern team. And we will be including a number of workshops, which we haven't done before, to teach all of you how to understand how we think about and make our predictions, and how to use pattern recognition to drive innovation in your company. So these are things that we have not done in the past. We think that this is going to be more engaging, more innovative, and will help you really understand how to use these things to protect the future of your company, the future of your own personal career, and to really continue to thrive in a very uncertain world. So we really do hope that you will join us. There are 2 levels of tickets that you can purchase. We recommend coming in on a VIP ticket that will allow you to talk to all of our speakers in the VIP breakout sessions. And with that, I'm going to transition. And one other big exciting announcement. We've got a lot. We've been doing a lot of things around here. So as many of you know, we have a private social network for all SNS members that is called Fire HQ. And the Fire HQ has been online for almost a year now, but we are just launched an app for Fire HQ. It is available in the Apple App Store now. All you have to do is go into the Apple App Store, search for Fire HQ. That will allow you to get all of your global reports on your mobile device. It will allow you to talk to other SNS members on the fly, wherever you are. If you are traveling, it lets you see which other SNS members are around you in the world. And you can message them and talk to them and meet up with them, or ask them to meet up, arrange meetings. You can look for investors, you can look for members of the press who are a part of the SNS community. It is a fantastic resource, and we really encourage you to use that. We have put a lot of time and effort this last year into making sure that you can connect with each other, not just at FIRE, but at any point during the year, and that we can continue the important initiatives and work that we often have started at FIRE throughout the year. So we really hope that you will use that. If you do not have a Fire HQ account yet, you can email Evan and request one, evan@stratnews.com. And with that, I would actually like to introduce Mark. So Mark is the CEO of Strategic News Service and publisher of the weekly SNS Global Report on technology and the global economy. He is also the only person to have publicly predicted both the 2008 global financial collapse and the oil price collapse, 2 of the most important economic events of modern times. He is the founding CEO of Pattern Computer and chair of FIRE. And he's also the author of The Pattern Future, Finding the World's Great Secrets and Predicting the Future Using Pattern Discovery. He's also co-founder of the Pattern Recognition Laboratory at UC San Diego. So those of you who are smart will recognize that there is another pattern here. And that pattern is Mark writing about creating and anticipating patterns. And so with that, I would like to introduce Mark Anderson.
Thank you, Barrett, very much. And thanks all of you who are here. We have a lot of folks here. We wish we could be face-to-face with you, which we have been doing in the past at the Waldorf or the Palace in New York. It's a lot of fun and the food is great. And we like seeing you face-to-face. But the good news is we get to get a lot more people involved this way. So I think we have about 4 times as many people or more than we would normally have, and that's great. Happy to have all of you with us. Let's see, there are a couple of things at the start I'd like to just lay out as we go. One is the Anderson family has apparently fallen into kind of a rut. We all quote Yeats all the time. This was not preordained, it just seems to have happened. So when you receive this, if you're an SNS member, which you will next week, you will notice there's a Yeats poem, Sailing to Byzantium, probably his most famous poem from 1933. And I'll just quote the last 3 lines of this poem. It's one of my favorites. And those are, set upon a golden bough to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is past or passing or to come. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to mention something else, which is every year we have a theme, an Uber theme. And this year, it took me quite a bit of work to come up with a unifying characteristic. And I picked righting the ship. And of course, it fits the Byzantium idea, but it also fits the world. And many, many, many of you are worried about more than one thing. I am too. And yet there are reasons to think that we can right the ship. It needs righting. And so that's obvious. Everybody knows it, but it can be turned back to where it should be. And so I think that's a pretty good way to consolidate everything you're going to hear next. I'm also going to mention that a little bit different from the past, I have arranged this as an outline very specifically. Now, you all know, I think, who've been here before, that I do this with my, when I'm doing the final 10 predictions, you'll notice I just read them. But this year, for other reasons, and definitely to be more specific with you, I'm going to be doing a little more reading than usual while we chat. So I'm going to do both. And it's because there are more predictions in this year's event than usual. Normally, I kind of just chat with you about landscapes, which is how we'll start again, the economic landscape and the technology landscape. But I'm going to do that in a more specific way than usual. And so I hope more value for you and more detail for me. And then last and not least, I will mention something that came out in, Beard and I did an interview, which was a lot of fun, a little mini interview, which you may have seen. And in that, I mentioned that it is a true thing now in making predictions that you really can't do this, you can't work in this field if you are not including China and their role in every single thing about what we make and what we do. And so it gets to be, from the outside, I'm sure, maybe not so much for members, you start wondering, why is he mentioning China so much? Well, I'll say it even more clearly. If one doesn't understand China's national business model, which we were the first to detect and then brief all the Five Eyes, or if you don't understand how that model works and what its results are, you have no business talking about the world economy, period. Get out of the business. You don't know what you're talking about. So we do, and therefore you will hear the word China, particularly at the top of this list of landscapes, because China, for a lot of reasons, is an important part of the landscape. So let's get started. This is the economic landscape first. And here we go. In today's global economy, China has a role, and it's a role which is not well understood by Wall Street, which is basically confused all the time now, as far as I can tell, because they don't understand China's role. And I call this hot money meets scarcity. Now, there are a number of things that China has done, either accidentally, but certainly on purpose, to create scarcity. And whether you're looking at supply chains and all the problems you've heard about and read about with supply chains, no matter how you want to see it, you can't escape the idea of scarcity. And scarcity, thanks to China, has driven up price. So everyone's worried about inflation right now. Every TV show you see, CNBC, BBC, whoever it is, inflation, where is it going to go next? How bad is it going to be? Who's going to have the worst part of this? It's a really big problem, and it's partly a really big problem because it's being caused in a new way. This kind of inflation, which now goes back to the record books of 1982, is not caused by the same things that were then the problem. And without understanding the cause of scarcity, it's hard for anyone in the investment world to understand where things will go next. But I'll say that horrible word that no one wants to hear, which is it is actually different this time. So be aware of the causes of scarcity before you start worrying too much about inflation. And if you want to understand how to track where it's going to go sector by sector, do it that way. And for those of you who are fans of SNS, I'm just going to throw in a little punchline here. This is the ultimate example of flow and interaction in a high demand, low supply global economy. It is the perfect example of how to apply what we call the two most important actions in the universe to this question of where is the economy in your country going to go next. The next thing up is China's role in inflation if we do it historically. So a lot of folks, I think, don't have a clue about this, but if you go back, and our members have seen this in action, China was and still is a currency manipulator. It sets its currency value every darn morning. It's not alone in doing that. Japan does it and others do it. But China by far has been the most aggressive. Generally, for the first 2 decades of its new model, it was pricing off on world markets by 25 to 40%, and everyone knew it. And no American president ever had the, I'll say this properly, balls, since they were guys, to call China out, and they still don't today. So yes, China is a currency manipulator. They are the world's experts at it. They did a lot of damage to the entire world economy, including launching Huawei at 40% off market price by doing that. So it works. It is called dumping on global markets, and it creates a lot of confusion if you're a Wall Street person. One of the things that happened was all of the world banks, the state banks around the world, the central banks had to respond, of course. So what did they do? Their economies are being gutted by this fake currency. And what do? How do they help their own Italian people or the American people? Well, they responded by quantitative easing. Now, everyone's heard that term, QE, quantitative easing. The only reason we have every central bank in the world pushing the heck out of printing money is because they had to do something in this fight. It's a huge fight. This is a war. It's an economic war, and they are the warriors. They are the front line in the economic war. And so the result was we have every country in the world basically doing quantitative easing. Now, suddenly, America, the Fed, will pull back, maybe faster than we thought, and we'll see how that works. But we've talked about this before in this actual meeting, and we're just approaching the next chapter in this very, very tough fight, and we'll see how it works out. Not exciting, but dangerous. This is, I'll say it again, different from what happened in 2007, 2008. And yet we're just the last week now seeing some of the same kinds of symptoms that we saw then. Those of you who've read the book that Barrett mentioned, The Pattern of Future, there's a whole chapter on that crash and how I made that call on the crash on TV, of all places, live TV. Don't do that to your interviewer. But this is different. We're seeing similar worries, similar symptoms. It may end up going the same direction. We haven't made that call yet. Probably will address it within the next month. Last and not least, I promised in this mini interview I did with Barrett not to address Chinese state cryptocurrencies, but I can't resist. It's just too important. So for those of you who are interested in cryptocurrencies, you will have noticed what we mentioned in the micro podcast, which was China began as being the top users and miners of crypto when it was Bitcoin and so forth. And then they suddenly made it illegal to have it in the country. And then suddenly they made it illegal to mine it, going from being the top users to top miners, then zero. And now, of course, they have their own e-renminbi or whatever you want to call it. And the question that has come to us through our members is, what does this mean? And I'm pretty clear what it means is that as these other things are being done to the economy to create inflation and all these myriad of sorrows we've got economically, while markets go up crazy fashion, China will then have complete second by second control, person by person control, transaction by transaction control worldwide. And by worldwide, I mean all these poor suckers who bought into the BRI program and owe money to China now will, I think, just as they were forced into the renminbi, be forced into the e-renminbi, whatever you want to call it. And that's going to be a tough fight. And that fight will be between China wanting to have been a reserve currency for the world and no one taking that bet. And here they'll come again electronically with a much more devious and powerful argument why they should be the top currency in the world. So get ready for that. We then have to jump from those Chinese roles to the China role in the COVID origin story. Now, I'll be boring some of you who are members, but just to keep the record clear, because we've just had a new set of propaganda pushes out of China again, some of them disguised as American reporters. So China's role in the COVID origin story in a few easy steps. A, we, the United States, funded, no, let me state this clearly. This is my personal opinion. But Evan Anderson and I and others have done an awful lot of research, and we've shared it with you. So I'm just going to say I am 99.8% certain that what I'm about to tell you is the truth. You'll have to find out for yourself what you should believe. A, the United States funded and built this disease using gain-of-function techniques in North Carolina, and Ralph Barrick, who has written and talked about this, was involved in doing it. B, when Ralph got too worried about it intelligently and decided it was too risky to human beings to do that kind of work, we just moved it to China, to the Wuhan lab. We probably sent them the exact bacterial and viral samples that he had been working on, and it went to Wuhan lab. At that point, we funded it at the lab through Peter Daszak, EcoHealth Alliance, with the knowledge, I'm pretty sure, of both Tony Fauci and Francis Collins, both of whom deny it. And Francis, as you know, just retired pretty quickly. I think he saw the big wave coming. So C, it then escaped. It didn't escape from a wet market. It escaped from the Wuhan laboratory, either intentionally or accidentally. We don't know, of course, because China won't let anyone do any kind of investigation that matters at all. We do know a lot about that. We know the doctors that were pulled off. We know the doctors that were threatened. We know the data that was destroyed. We know the things that were taken offline after they're put online. We know that the closet is empty. There is nothing in the lab now. If you went there tonight, you wouldn't find a thing. So a lot of damage to evidence has been done. And all of that has been managed by the CCP. So the way this plays in my book is whether it got out accidentally and then they prevented anyone from knowing the truth and do that until today, or whether it got out on purpose, doesn't matter. It has been managed by the Chinese Communist Party as an act of war, of bio-war, in either case. And that's just too bad. And D, new variants. If we made COVID-19 originally, who made the new variants? And what else went missing from that Wuhan lab locker? I'll come back to this a little later. You can hear my phone. I'm going to throw my watch across the room now. So last and not least, and I'm not kidding, the CCP is now last week saying that actually it was raccoon dogs that did it. I've never heard of raccoon dogs before, but I don't think probably raccoon dogs are any more likely than their prior suggestion, which was it was frozen Maine lobster that did it. And all I can say is China is now isolating itself in the global community by this clownish performance of an ongoing series of ridiculous suggestions. So number 4, there are 4 Chinese lies that really, I think, global leaders can no longer ignore. And I could add, I'll add the Uyghur concentration camps because they say there is no such thing. When you're a global leader and you know these lies are lies, I think you now can no longer escape your responsibility of doing something responsible. Number 1, COVID came from the wet market. We've just covered that. But look, somewhere between 5 and 10 million people have been killed worldwide. If a country did that with bullets or bombs, what would happen? Number 2, our national economic model is robust, China says. Just ignore the little Evergrande problem in the corner. It's only a little symptom of something that doesn't matter. And the core of the Chinese model is in good shape. But in fact, that's a lie. The core of the Chinese model has been collapsing since 2015. And the shoring up process is now itself bankrupt. They're kind of out of tricks. So I can imagine how terrified the standing committee is, and underline very. And if you know this, it helps you understand both the propaganda that comes out and their desperation for hard money, for hard currency, which is just more and more obvious. We called the Evergreen bankruptcy, I guess, I don't know, months ago, 6 months ago, and it's been a very slow train wreck. They just missed another date yesterday. So now they're technically really in default. We'll see what happens, but it doesn't matter what happens to Evergrande. What matters is it's not what they say. It's not this 3 red line business. What you're seeing with Evergrande and all the other companies in China in the property sector is just the most obvious part of a deeper collapse going on with their economy. Number 3, we didn't kill anyone. Um, that's just a lie. I mean, look at America only. The, the top killer from disease, and by the way, it's not listed on the CDC page, which I checked this morning, is not heart disease, which they list, it's COVID. Over 700,000 Americans have died from COVID. It's an amazing thing. And then if you ask, well, what else is coming out of China that kills Americans? Oh, fentanyl. China manufactures almost all of the precursor chemicals that then are shipped to elsewhere, including Mexico, and then turned into opioids that are added to other drugs, and they kill people. We lost about 80,000 people last year, maybe a little more from that. This is a fighting war. This is a military attack, but it's being done through what China calls unrestricted warfare. So finally, the lie of we just want to get along. We just want to get along. Well, actually, as far as I can tell from the patterns of actions of Xi Jinping, there is one major pattern, and that is we just want to be globally dominant, starting with economics and adding the military later. So that's it. It's political, it's military, and it's economic. And economics is the frontline fight. So I'm going to get out of that rut, and we'll jump forward on the climate economically. There's bad news and good news. There are these mega events that are coming. It's kind of terrifying. Peter Wadhams and I did a YouTube video, which I would recommend you go look at. He's a very smart guy from Cambridge University. And he's saying that as soon as 5 years, if not right now, we're seeing these events that had been siloed events starting to interact with each other in ways which no one at the IPCC had predicted. And so you get you get things happening that you just wouldn't even guess about, but fires affecting weather, weather affecting fires. In Siberia, you get methane coming out of explosive holes in the ground all over Siberia, which creates other releases of methane and destroys the environment at the same time and creates fires. So this kind of activity in California, one fire becoming many fires becoming one fire. This stuff is way off the charts, even for the IPCC. And so that's bad news. It's frightening. It does wake up the world. And that's the good news. We are starting to actually behave better because these things are frightening us. These things aren't for 2050. These things are for now, 5 years from now, 3 years from now. The US unemployment is way down, which is great news. Markets are up, which is terrific news. And we're going to have increased consumer spending, which is good for the economy. Specifically, the global rich effects. So think about that. There are more rich people getting richer now than ever before, and it happens more and more each year. There's another story here, which is a good story for the middle class. But right now, I'm talking about the rich folks. And guess what? We're not talking about PCs and phones. We're talking about interpersonal networks and private networks, romantic networks, levels of play that are really not on anybody's game book, I don't think. Private jets, everyone knows about that. Much more private jet work going on. Safe and exclusive resorts? Of course not. Why else would you want to play at another resort if it were not safe and exclusive? Second homes are so yesterday. How about third homes? How about new towns? We're going to see things like this that nobody ever dreamed of. There's just so much hot money flying around in the hands of very wealthy people. On the other hand, this is 1939. So does Wall Street get slapped or do they get paid? They get paid by both sides. It is 1939. And you know whose sides are, which sides. And yet we have what I'm going to call the wall of shame. And I'm going to hopefully talk Evan, he doesn't know this, I'm going to talk Evan into writing a GR with a new wall of shame. And I can tell you who my first pick is, Tim Cook. Now this week, The Information ran a story, so it's not me talking, where Tim secretly signed a deal with the Communist Party. If they would stop harassing him and let him sell stuff there, he would spend $275 billion over 5 years, can you believe, secretly on things like AI, R&D, training Chinese to be better than us at AI, building new factories, doing the best manufacturing in the world, on and on, investing in Chinese companies too. Well, shame on you, Tim. That's called aiding and abetting the enemy. And Tim doesn't think he has a country, I guess, but he does. Chinese companies know that they have a country American companies get confused, but they too have a company in a country. So Pat Gelsinger, friend of mine, same deal. Stop it. David Calhoun, head of Boeing, same deal. Cut it out. And if you really want to get inspired, I think go listen to Australian leadership speeches. They're exciting and fun. Jumping to countries now, other countries, Russia. Think about this. Putin's job has always been to break up NATO. That's what he wanted. So think of the cost of a full-scale, the Cold War, it was like having a 10,000 tank invasion of Eastern Europe in the Fulda Gap. Well, what do you think if someone went to Putin and said, for the cost of 5 teenagers in a basement in St. Petersburg, you can kill more Americans or Westerners by having misinformation about COVID on the internet than you drove 10,000 tanks through Eastern Europe? Which one do you want? And I think he went for window B, It was an easy choice, the 5 teenagers in the basement. Something that a lot of folks haven't picked up on very well. I asked myself, why was Putin bombing those poor civilians and the hospitals that they went to then in Syria? What was that about? I mean, really, they weren't fighting anybody. He was bombing apartment buildings and stuff. Why destroy whole suburbs? What was the point of just going after civilians? And then I realized they all went to Europe. That huge wave that destabilized France and Germany and Europe of immigrants mostly came from Syria because they couldn't live there anymore. They're terrified. This is terror bombing. And guess what? Putin hates Islamic peoples. He came to power by falsely claiming that Chechnya had killed all these poor apartment building people that they had bombed them and that they had killed children. No, that was Putin at work. That's how he became the head of Russia. So he's got a thing for all these stands on the south of Russia. And he's used that, feeling of hate, I guess, to double down and drive Islamic peoples from all over the world into his enemies' countries. Brilliant move, Putin, and it's caused havoc for everyone involved. I think someone should really tell that story in a much better way than I just did. It's a big story. All right, Germany, as you know, the Merkel worldview is over. Thank goodness. Bye-bye. And go Greens. We're excited about the Green Party, and the Green Party is excited about the Green Party. We've had them on our fireside. They're great people, and they're going to change the complexion of German behavior in the world, including, sorry, China, you don't get to control Germany anymore. It's not over, but it's definitely over in terms of Angela Merkel kowtowing to China. Their industrial base, on the other hand, will be safer, and that's good news for Germany. CRINC, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, we made up that term. China moves strongly into the Arctic, and China prepares for taking Taiwan, even as Russia prepares for taking Ukraine. Could it be an accident that both these things are happening at the same exact time? No. Meanwhile, rockets keep moving from Russia to Iran and from Iran to North Korea, and nuclear test results, I'm convinced, move back from North Korea to Iran. I call it the Mordor team. No good comes from it. Turkey, the Erdogan flails about in his own self-built cage, caught between the secular past, Islamic zealot opponents' political paranoia, and counterfactual management of the economy. The result will be the worst of these worlds, political economics and religious paranoia. Does the Turkish economy collapse? And with what collateral damage? That's the big question. It's happening pretty fast. Then we have Japan. Together with us, Australia, the political heart of the New West. This is an exciting idea. Japan and Australia are the political heart of the New West. And we have a new prime minister, as you know, in Japan, Fumio Kishida. Exciting guy, I think. And how exciting for the whole world that we do have a New West, and they're willing to stand up day by day to their neighbors in China. Finally, Scott Morrison from Australia, cool guy. He surprised me. I had no hope really for Scott. He's the only prime minister of the last 4 who I've not met personally yet, and he is taking the global lead against China. Well done. As Evan would say, well played. So I'm excited about this. I think there's some really neat things happening down in that part of the world. The tech landscape, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Chips are everything. Fabs will go to 2 nanometers, happening now. New AI-driven designs will happen in chip design. We're going to have more fabs for more types of chips. And chip investment worldwide is going to move toward the $400 billion marker. A lot of money, about twice as much as people are thinking right now. There are major Asian chip firms which will escape the gravity of their parent countries. And that kind of is the big story. So Taiwan Semiconductor, TSMC, already expanding to Japan, the EU, and the US. Samsung gets out of China. Well done, Samsung. And expands to the US and elsewhere, probably the EU. Intel is the throwback. It's expanding in China, the US, and the EU. Hey, Pat, stop betting on China. It's so, well, traitorous. This really is the 1930s all over again. Just ask Australia and its defense chief. NVIDIA will lose its arm battle, and that's already begun to happen. And they'll go after another target. Don't know who it's going to be yet. And Qualcomm is making good moves beyond the phone market, but the new CEO is going to have to stick the landing to make it work. Good luck, because you're going to need it. It's hard to do this. Number 2, the global tech schism, which we've talked about for years. China will fail to install a second world of its own technical standards, but will not stop trying. And then we have solar and wind. This is exciting. You may remember, if you're an SNS member, we put out an idea called Go Light. And the idea was this: what if everyone who was a global leader decided right now, and we're encouraging this to happen, to drop all of your other ideas and plans and demands and plans and demands and plans and demands, and only prioritize one thing: build solar. And for 5 years, just put your other things aside and build solar. If you did that, we're calling that Go Light. If you did that, the world's problems would be over as far as global warming. Just imagine that for a minute. Be creative, be imaginative, be a little optimistic. Don't be a jerk, and put aside your other priorities and your greed and your, and just go light. If the top 5 countries did that, we'd be good. How hard can it be to go light? Meanwhile, it will still be true that solar and wind are the big deal, and offshore wind farms and land-based solar farms, both larger than ever built until now, will be built and will help accelerate what seemed impossible yesterday to just being too slow and hard tomorrow. Jump to healthcare, the most dramatic innovation sector easily in 2022. Inside that sector, we're going to see AI and other advanced mathematics. I tend to say pattern discovery, and it will lead to major advances in both diagnostics and therapeutics. The unsolvable will be increasingly solvable, and the untreatable increasingly treatable. And here I've got a horse in the race, but COVID will continue as a now permanent social context, with the ongoing appearance of major variants displaying dozens of sudden mutations, often in the spike area. We continue to be unable to have public discussions regarding whether any of these variants are human-made through gain of function. Or whether they're intentionally released. I wish someone would talk about that, other than us. And see, non-invasive real-time diagnostic tools powered by advanced mathematics will begin a multi-decadal march toward how we do medicine. This is really exciting. So those are our basic issues in terms of landscapes. And as usual, I'll mention that when we do our GR, our global report in a week, you will see also last year's predictions. My favorite call from last year, which was a slam dunk, if I do say so myself. I usually try to find like the worst call I made, but I got to pull this one out. I suggested that Elon Musk would become the richest guy in the world. Done deal. That worked out for Elon and for us. So, 300 billion and going. He is. So if you read the thing, you'll see it looks to me as though, and here's a rut that I've been in increasingly, so it kind of becomes its own, I think, internal spiral toward the number 95. So Barrett said 95.1. I don't know. Last year was 95. It pushed it down a little bit, so it's 95 point something. I think 95 is going to be where I live for the rest of my prediction professional life, and that's where we are still. And having said all that, it's time for 2022. And as always, I will read these out, boring as it is to hear someone read something, because I will have to live and die by the sword on these a year from now. So here are the top 10 predictions from us to you for 2022. Number 1, battery technology responds to the most intense financial and innovation pressures in tech history, leading to radical improvements in both energy density and safety. New materials, solid state, cheaper, faster, better. Huge fortunes are bet, lost, and made. Number 2, and again, I do have a dog in this hunt. Rapid, accurate COVID detection will be recognized as the necessary complement to vaccination, with both being understood as required in order to avoid continuing health and economic damage. New math and pattern discovery will provide the detection improvements needed to keep the world going on both fronts. And you'll note I'm not saying lockdowns or lockouts. Number 3, everyone makes chips, and chips are for everyone. We leave the era of chip monopolies and rapidly move into a completely new era of technological innovation at the most basic, often commercial levels. Forget Intel, welcome Ford and GM. Forget PCs, servers, and smartphones, and welcome smart everything. Number 4, we accept the world of absolute insecurity from IoT and home networks to ad tracking, the surveillance state, and completely invasive vendor behavior. While security companies remain prosperous, no one and nothing is trusted to be secure. This has a deep psychological effect on citizens, customers, and partners, in addition to the mammoth hidden tax put onto people, companies, and transactions by this forever condition of theft and loss. Number 5, China becomes a pariah state, at last seen for what it really is and really does to its own people and to others. Disengagement by the free world moves from a so-called impossibility 2 years ago to staged inevitability for all who can protect themselves. And I'll give a little shout out again to Evan for the work he's doing on disengagement, which you've been reading about in parts, and which will become a book when he's all finished. Number 6, SpaceX turns out to be well named since it now owns the commercial space. No one else is even close. From Virgin to NASA to Boeing and the Launch Alliance, outside the Earth's atmosphere, Elon is an emperor. Well done, Elon. Number 7, consumer spending goes up in the West as too many years in COVID isolation drives enhanced consumption, particularly of luxury items for oneself. This category is led by cars, and cars, with lots of expensive art, rare scotch, and other collectibles close behind, as the category of alternative assets investment explodes, hedging against inflation. Number 8, the not so well hidden internal contraction and/or collapse of China's domestic economic machine accelerates, with tells moving beyond the property development and related markets and into an increasing number of sectors with higher bankruptcy rates and more desperate, if secret, corporate bailouts by the CCP. There are no private companies now in China. And new dictator for life, Xi, although worshipped by children brainwashed on so-called Xi thought, is no longer the popular guy he so recently was. Number 9, the climate struggle is joined. Faced with certain damage, agreed science, and the threat of new mega events, and encouraged by international consensus, the world seriously begins the exciting and painful move away from generations of terracide. Things go faster than predicted only a year ago. And number 10, the world economic war for a middle class becomes a defining and now public fight and characterizes a policy pivot away from globalism and the ownership class and toward the neglected goals of reshoring manufacturing, restoring jobs, and increasing middle class incomes. So there you have it, Barrett and friends. Those are my thoughts for 2022. And we'll come back a year again from now and see if indeed that's how things turned out. Barrett, back to you.
Thank you very much. So we are going to switch over to Q&A. If you have a question for Mark, please drop it in the chat and I will call on you. In the meantime, I'm going to back up a little bit to a few questions from earlier in the agenda. So Dave Cornell asks, where do we get 4 billion solar panels without including China?
Yeah, perfect question. So let's go back in history and find out, why does China control 90% of the solar panel market? And the answer is what we talked about just now. So when the CCP decided that they wanted to destroy all competition in that market worldwide, they did so. They did it by dumping solar panels. And they wiped out essentially all the American and German manufacturers of that product. And so the short answer, Dave, is we're going to buy them from China. That's okay. Let's do it. The longer answer ought to be, let's make them where we used to make them, at home. Let's reshore them and give those jobs to people who really deserve them, including the inventors.
Okay, lots of questions coming in. So we'll start with Jody Westby. Jody, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Which the China-Taiwan question, or
Yeah.
So you didn't mention China-Taiwan, Mark. What's up with that?
I did.
You did?
I did. I said China is gearing up to invade Taiwan at the same time that Russia is gearing up to invade the Ukraine.
I missed it.
Is this a coincidence? It is not.
That was that. I was busy taking notes and you said something. I missed it. Well, I'm glad I asked it again. Maybe someone else did too.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, well, I think they're going to try to do that too.
I do too. It is. Now, I mentioned this in writing, as you probably remember, not too long ago, and we got a dose of the folks who thought they knew best. Maybe they did, and how ridiculous it would be. Vince Cerf, my friend, even pointed me to a person I won't mention, who's a very famous China-happy, China-friendly guy who gets paid to go over there all the time. And he said, that's ridiculous, in a private email, but he's an idiot. So yes, they are. And one of the reasons I can make this call, at least from the perspective of knowing he will try in some way or other, is that it is the last thing on his wish list. Before Xi dies, he has one more thing. He's taken Hong Kong. He's done all the things he said he would do, the South China Sea. What is the last? There's really just one thing left other than global domination, and that is Taiwan. So he's not going to leave that stone unturned.
Yeah.
Somebody could shoot him or get rid of him politically, but if he's allowed to stay in power, he does have that last thing on his bucket list. So I think, knowing how committed he is to what he says he will do, he has told us that that's his last thing. All right.
Okay. Matt Griscom has a question for you. Matt? Would you like to ask it or should I ask it? I can ask it.
Go ahead.
So the question is, what will Russia do to discourage progress on slowing climate change?
Nice question. These are nice questions.
We have smart members.
Smart members. Well, Nord Stream 2, huh? Right? Matter of fact, I thought it was kind of cute of Biden in his talk yesterday with, or was it 2 days ago with Putin. One of his worse than you can imagine things was, we're not going to let Nord Stream 2 open up. We're going to make sure that never, ever happens. And I thought that was a pretty clever poker chip. So I think there are a lot of things that Putin is doing with OPEC that have perverted OPEC and helped them maintain global cartel control when they had lost it. And I think he'll do more of the same. So they are very cleverly reaping the whirlwind of pricing at $100 or just, almost, they're back to early prices from a long time ago, not because there's a lack of oil. There's plenty of oil. They're just running that cartel poker game all night long. So he'll keep doing that.
And Rick Lefebvre
and play the, yeah, go ahead.
So Rick Lefebvre had a related question. Rick, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Yeah, along the same lines. I mean, you talked a lot about China. What do you think is going to happen to Russia? What do you think is going to happen to oil prices over time? What do you think is going to happen when the Russian people finally get fed up with Putin? What's your kind of long-term view of what happens to Russia?
Well, first of all, COVID makes oil prices high. There's something deeper than that, though, Rick, which is really interesting. We haven't written about this yet. There's plenty of evidence right now that COVID opened the door to inflation, but once that started, everyone started raising prices faster than inflation, faster than COVID required. All this BS about the supply chain was a wonderful excuse for whether you're making hogs, pigs, or feathers to charge 5 times more than you used to and get away with it.
Greed never goes away.
Never goes away. So that someone needs to write that story. That's a big story. And if you really want to understand inflation, you have to go to the greed thing, not just to the COVID thing. Yeah. But just, either one of those things is enough to keep prices high right now. I think that the answer about Putin in Russia is that Putin keeps killing off the people he doesn't like. He tried to kill Navalny. We all know it. He kills people in any country that he wants to, and he kind of enjoys it. I think he likes it. He gets a kick out of it. So he'll send, SVR anywhere to take people out. Downtown London doesn't matter. I'm sure he does it in America too. So, he'll be in power as long as he wants to be in power. I don't see him getting pushed out by anybody, because anytime he sees a little tall nail pop up, he slams that right down. Yeah.
The same thing that Jew does.
Yes. They're having a great time together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Raleigh Cole has a question.
Good. Hi, Raleigh.
Raleigh, do you want to ask your question? About manufacturing and middle income jobs.
Go ahead, Barrett.
Okay, he said, well, 1950s manufacturing was a big source of middle income jobs. Yes. Highly automated new century manufacturing is not. Will something else be the key source of middle income jobs? Sure.
You can look at dark factories in Japan and even in China, but mostly in China, they're not dark factories. So, if Hanhai really did bring their manufacturing back to America, you'd have a lot of people in the middle class working in those factories. That's already happening in non-union states, right? Right to work states. So Tennessee, South Carolina, and so forth. China loves those states. And they've got a lot of factories there already. And there are people who are Americans who love China just for that, just for bringing those factories over. So it's not doable. It's doable. We just have to do it. And I think it'd be nice if we did it in both union and non-union states, but I'm glad they're in America. So it's not a truism that all factories are dark factories.
All right. Next question is from John Patoti. John, are you available? He asked, any predictions on current high inflation sustainability?
Well, that's the COVID question and the greed question. So, if you're wondering about that, as I mentioned in the beginning of this program, you want to look at what did China do to screw up supply chains on purpose? One way to look at the variant question, if we're taking the dark side for a moment, which I happen to take, I don't believe that all these variants are naturally occurring. And I wish someone again would talk more about that. But imagine that the first COVID bug got out by accident, but then, China shuts down all information. And then say a year or two later, a general comes to Xi Jinping and says, well, we are on our 10-year program for world domination in the economy. We are 8 years ahead of schedule, thanks to COVID. And my recommendation to you, Xi, is that we release more of these things. How would he say no? I don't know how he would say no. All he would say, I think, would be, make sure we don't get caught. He says, done deal. So when you're looking at artificial scarcity that drives inflation, ask yourself about that story. It's pretty tough.
Okay, next question is from Brad Holtz, who asks, comments on the current mass resignation.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think there are bright sides to all these things. We see Oracle moving out of Redwood City and into Austin and leaving all their people still in place in California, but the headquarters has moved. And Larry Ellison moved to Lanai, to Hawaii. Bye, guys. I'll see you later on Zoom. So the world definitely has changed in terms of workplaces. I'm proud to say I think Pattern was one of the very first tech companies to go virtual, and we're still there. So I don't think this is a bad thing. I do think people want to see each other face to face. And I think that companies that push too hard on, whether it's on vaccination or whether it's on face to face, are getting pushed back with people quitting. And behind that, there's a deeper thing, which is people are feeling more introspective and more value driven, I think. COVID has caused a lot of introspection. And that may lead you to take your family out of San Francisco, which is having these bizarre shopping attacks, on Nordstrom, and just get out of the city. Who wants to live there? And instead, go to Montana. I'd go. So I'm not sure this is bad. I think this is pretty interesting. And I remember when Boeing went bust 2 times ago, and somebody put up that road sign that said, "We're the last person leaving Seattle, please turn out the lights." It was pretty funny. But also what happened is a huge wave of entrepreneurship. And I think that part of the mass resignation isn't really that. It's going to be people picking differently, choosing different lives, and maybe being more entrepreneurial. Start their own company, do something different, do something that you believe in more. And frankly, fellow CEOs, that means the challenge to you is you better make working at your firm, whatever you're doing, more meaningful culturally and personally to the people in the company. If you do that, you'll probably be fine. But if you just think it's just gonna be like, punch card in and punch card out at 5, yeah, you're gonna see a lot of people go. So it's a challenge to CEOs, I think.
The other part of that Evan and I were discussing recently is anytime you have, we just had 2 years where no one would quit their jobs. And I don't think that is discussed enough, which is there's a giant backlog of people who wanted to quit their jobs throughout that whole time, who now finally feel secure enough in the future of the world to do that.
Yeah.
And when you combine that with a range of service industry jobs, especially, which have been a large focus of this kind of like mass resignation hysteria,
yes,
where people were fundamentally underpaid,
yes,
to begin with, the level of the wage ratio to inflation is just crazy. And when you combine that with suddenly, not only are they being completely underpaid, but they are having to face a fundamental risk to their health and their families every time they go to work. Of course, we're going to see that kind of mass resignation.
Speaking of which, Barrett, I don't know if I mentioned this, but among the many things that Tim Cook told the Communist Party he would do and then did was when, Uber, of course, is like, never made money, and Didi didn't either. So Tim kindly gave $1 billion to Didi. Thank you, Tim.
Wow, you can't make that stuff up. Okay.
All right.
Okay. So Chuck asked, will we bring pharma home from China?
Yes.
And on a related note, Art Kleiner asked, if China doesn't make it as the reserve currency, does that mean the dollar keeps?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Anything else? Just yeah.
Simple is good, you know.
Okay. Mark Sachs, always the trying to stir things up, asks, what about the UFOs? Any play there? Or NASA sending a rocket to destroy an asteroid as a quote test? Could this all be played?
Oh, that's a good one, Mark. Well, they're not called UFOs, of course. Now they're aerial phenomena, right? They're UAPs. And, you know, that's a totally different deal out there. It's UAPs, not UFOs. Does anyone doubt that there aren't actually, whatever you want to call them, flying around from somebody else? I'm sure there are. Everybody's seen them. We have movies of them. You can go on YouTube and watch them all night long. So, you know, I mean, we've had state troopers and governors and people of good, will, and all kinds of trained observers and pilots in the Navy. And there's just no lack of people who've seen them. And whether it's a tic tac jumping around or something else, they do things which no Russian or American can do. So, yeah, somebody's out there. You kind of feel like you're being played by your own government, whatever country you live in, so that you won't freak out. Like, it's like that thing where you just can't handle the truth, right? Famous line from Officer and a Gentleman. But yeah, we can. I think we can. So bit by bit, we're being allowed to know a little more, a little more, a little more. And at some point, we'll just sit here and talk all day long about those funny tic tacs up there.
Okay. Eric Jansen has a great question. Eric, do you want to ask your question? Are you available? And next, I'm going to go to Thomas Poole. So if you're there.
No, I'm there.
Eric.
And I apologize if this looks like a gratuitous ad, but it isn't. What are the 5 things we can all do in the disengagement with China? I mean, how do we engage to disengage?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's your question. Oh,
Yeah.
I have an expert actually on this call. And I know one of my favorite things is to say I don't know and I don't know the answer. But Evan, are you getting ready? Because I'm gonna call on you.
I'm sorry about the gratuitous opportunity here.
No, thank you very much. So Evan, are you there?
Yeah. So Eric, I actually would second Mark's I don't know with the caveat of yet, but I have some ideas. And so I think that we've got a number of different fields we can work on here, and people kind of tend to go, oh, well, by disengagement, do you mean ceasing all contact with China? And of course, the answer is no, because that won't be possible in the short term anyhow, but there are a lot of things we can do. And so I don't know about a list of 5. That's kind of exactly what I'm going to publish in SNS. So, I won't spoil it, but before I say anything and contaminate other people's thoughts, if anyone has ideas about this, please send them in to me. I would be happy to give you credit and talk about them if I think they're great. I think that the first most obvious way that that'll happen, and it already is happening, and it's important and it should happen, is that we'll take the industries that are really important. I mean, they've already taken Made in China 2025. They've taken the industries that are really important that they know will help them dominate the global economy. Paul Wolfowitz is raising his hand as well. And so I think we need to work through that same kind of list, and we already are. But we need to get much deeper into it, whether it's, rare earths, chips. We need to have our own secure sources of those kinds of things in the United States or amongst our allies. And we need to stop putting money into the coffers of the CCP by buying their products. And we need to stop creating security problems for ourselves by buying their products in those critical categories. So I think the list of what is critical is going to need to expand. It already has a couple times, and it will again. And I think we need to stop pumping money into their economy as well. So there's about 5,000 ways you could discuss that. And I'd be curious to hear Paul's thoughts as well.
Yeah, Paul, did you have a specific comment on that question?
He's muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
What about driving the wealthy members of the National People's Congress out of the real estate markets in Palo Alto and New York and London?
Absolutely.
By confiscating their assets under the Global Magnitsky Act.
Yep. And I would say the same thing for Russia. I think I've had a number of conversations right now recently with some pretty smart folks whose opinion I really believe almost every time I hear it, who said exactly the same thing, Paul, about if you wanted to stop Putin from invading Ukraine, Nord Stream 2 is great, but you've got a lot of pretty healthy targets sitting right on Miami Beach.
Yeah.
And just exposing them is huge in political impact.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know why we aren't more active in that area, but we ought to be.
Yeah. Well done, Paul.
We brought down the Malaysian government doing that a few years back.
Hit them where it hurts, right?
It is bad.
All right,
Thank you, Paul.
thank you. So Thomas, are you ready? Cool.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, just, I don't know if I'm being naive or looking for some hope, but is it the CCP's corruption and incompetence, whatever kind of organism it is, or is it the outright evil of the Chinese leadership? Either way, the accountability is there. We know the location of origin, and we know what happened afterwards. I know it looks like an 8-year leap in strategy, genius. What about the blowback from the rest of the world? We're just starting to see it, or is there any evidence of it yet
Yes.
against the CCP?
Yes, there is evidence. And that's why I said that they're kind of entering a time of self-isolation, and I think they'll be perceived as being a pariah state. So even their future targets are getting nervous. Countries that are being approached by China now are turning them away on BRI. So it's starting to happen, and I think it'll accelerate.
Great question. Thanks, Thomas. So John Anderson is next with a question, and then I'll go to Russ Daggett. So John, he says he's in a high noise environment, so I'll ask his questions for him. What could our federal and state politicians do to restore public trust? And what could big tech do to earn public trust and get out of the narrative censor role?
I don't know how you do that with a free speech internet, because the lack of trust isn't caused necessarily. The direct causes of all this trouble are not the symptoms, they're the disease. In other words, Congress is not the disease, it's the symptom. And the disease is the division caused by the internet. And I'll make a pretty tough statement. I don't believe that, I know people think we're supposed to be in a democracy, but I'll tell you for a fact, our founding fathers had no intention ever of having a democracy in this country. They wanted a republic. And people who scoff at the Electoral College don't understand history. They wanted that as a buffer between the hoi polloi, the unwashed masses, and people who were highly educated and able to make a responsible decision, whatever that means. And you can read all about this if you read history and the thoughts they went through in creating the Constitution and so on. So now we live not only in what's eventually becoming a democracy, not a republic, but we're giving the tools of self-publishing and anger making and so forth to every single person in the world. They don't have to live in your country. Those 5 teenagers in the basement of the St. Petersburg IRA, they don't live in America. They just ruin America, and they're really good at it. So they get paid for it. So how do you prosper today in a world with a free speech country and a pervasive internet, which is being used by your enemies day and night to make you angry with each other and go fight each other and kill each other and spend money to do that and get guns and don't take vaccines and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how you do that. I think that's the deepest issue. It's not even going to be climate change. It's going to be being able to talk about climate change. And you can't do that because those 5 teenagers, et cetera, are getting in your way. So we need to figure that out. And I know there's a big effort at Congress level and in the EU more to go after big tech because they're the vehicle for this stuff. But you could also say if you got rid of the top 5 tech companies, Russia would invent another one tomorrow. And I tell you, Mr. Trump, Mr. T, just raised $1 billion so that he can have his very own private Twitter. And he'll be back doing that exact work with Russia's help. So it's very hard. And I wish I had a better answer. It's a great idea, great question. But what we need to do really, I think, is accept some level of regulation that we're not used to in America in terms of free speech. That's going to happen, I guess.
Pressing.
Yeah.
All right, Russ.
Yeah. Hey, Mark. What's your take on what's your take on NFTs? Are they an enduring asset class, or just people bidding up the price of receipts for bragging rights?
Well, Russ, you've managed to, as usual, ask like they confuse me, Russ. I see someone paying $10,000 for a picture of a kitty that's not a very nice picture, and I don't understand why they paid that. So I have to say, I'm not buying any.
Well, I'm glad it's not just me.
Yeah, I mean, I even bought some Bitcoin, but I'm not buying any NFTs. So I'm just not going there. It's crazy stuff. Maybe there will be a subsequent offshoot use of NFTs that is really good. Like, when Monet painted the final painting and you bought the NFT of the Monet painting just before he died, that might work. But in terms of me throwing together cat pictures to sell them to you for $10,000, nah, it's not gonna work.
Hey, Mark, the original of your predictions sheet should be sold as an NFT.
Oh, God.
Yeah, we could. Good idea.
Oh, we're all doomed.
Okay, so we're gonna go to Mary, who on Simon's login is calling in from London. Mary, are you there, or should I ask for you? And then we're gonna go to John Cephas Jr. Martin next. Okay, are we going to see big changes in corporate social governance, organized labor, and unions in the technology space, and any real change from that, or just more deck chair rearrangement, she asks?
It's interesting to watch Google, the Be No Evil company. Do no evil, right? What a joke. There they are. Hi, guys. And Simon and Mary. I think Google is pretty instructive because they are pretty evil, and I don't see them changing much. Europe, as you know, just charged them, and they lost their appeal on this. Was a $2-point-something billion fine, biggest fine ever levied against a tech firm. I think it slowed them down too much. They'll pay it and keep going. So the willingness of big tech to get captured by their own revenue streams. Tim Cook would be a perfect example. Paying bribes to China, to the Communist Party directly to be allowed to fight a losing battle, which is exactly what's happening in China for Apple. So, yeah, I don't see a lot of good things there. I don't see, people waking up in the morning and smelling the coffee and the flowers and having sudden inspiration to unionize, or, Starbucks doesn't want to do it. Amazon sure doesn't want to do it. I don't see good news there.
The first Starbucks location just unionized in Buffalo, but because one of the things I wonder about is the importance of inequity. I mean, along with COVID over the last couple of years, we've seen an awful lot of inequity and response to that. Black Lives Matter. The helicopters are still flying every night in Minneapolis, and the pressures from that, and whether there's going to be even more cracks coming in development of and resistance to technology, or whether there might actually be some meaningful change out of that would help move things forward.
Well, I think there will be meaningful change, Mary, but not coming from big tech, but maybe coming from other from small companies, and from, we were just talking about the number of entrepreneurs that are probably being hatched right now around the world. That's a big number. So I think there's some very good news in there. And whether it really involves unions, I don't know, but I think it will involve more middle class pay and more people who are, poor today, getting jobs and being able to do whatever they're going to do in tech tomorrow. So I think there's a lot of good news available. It just won't come from Google. It'll come from this other wave of things.
Simon had a question as well. And Simon, do you want to ask your question while you guys are?
Yeah, sure. I was one of the things I was thinking about, you were talking about the onshoring of industry. And obviously one of the tools that governments have for dealing with that are capital gains taxes. But there's a definite push against them and a push against them being used against that as a tool in that way. So forcing companies to reinvest rather than to just take gains.
Yes.
How can we actually get over that speed bump?
I don't know how, but I know what happens if you do it wrong.
Hmm.
So, and you can do it wrong on either side, right? You can do it wrong either way.
Oh yeah.
But watching Elizabeth Warren trying to get her campaign speeches into practice in bills in Congress with punitive capital gains, not realizing that absolutely will destroy the innovation funding, the venture funding that keeps America great or the world great, is just stupid. On the other hand, you want to have a taxable a tax regime which encourages what you just said, Simon. So how do you reward companies for reshoring? Not hard. It's easy. Do it. I mean, we don't even have to discuss it. Just do it. But who's against that? Well, the companies sometimes themselves are. And I'll get back to my little Tim Cook wall of shame rant here with Boeing and Intel. When I started Invent IP, and now it's almost 10 years ago, a very smart, good friend of mine, Bill Budinger, who's an attorney, he's a tech guy, an IP lawyer in DC. He called me up and he said, it's not going to work. And I said, why not? He said, your biggest enemies will be the biggest companies in America. And even today, the Chamber of Commerce, I have a friend who just quit the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors after 10 years. He was completely disgusted that they're still, arguing for greed and arguing for being in China. And he knows how wrong that is. So he quit. I'm completely fed up with the American Chamber of Commerce. I think they're dinosaurs. But you got guys like Boeing running it. Of course, they put a lot of money into the chamber. They're going to get what they want. We need to actually have this wall of shame and on our website somewhere where, it's 1939. And if you're Ford, you're trying to say Hitler's a good guy, don't worry, it'll be okay. We want to make tanks for him. Or you have IBM saying, we love Hitler and we want to sell them computers so that they can kill Jews in their concentration camps and count them properly. Stop that. Just effing stop it. And if it takes a rule or two, fine, let's pass the law, right? And if that's a good taxation measure at the same time, excellent, good move. Get on with it. It's not hard. It just requires us fighting Boeing, fighting Intel, fighting Tim Cook at home. That's my little
Okay, thank you. So I want to go back to John Cephas Jr. Martin, who I promised I would get to several moments ago and was waylaid by the London contingency. John, are you there? All right, his question is General Motors' new deal with California rare earth mines just whitewashing or a forward-looking un-Tim Cook chess move, notwithstanding Chinese Buicks?
It's a good move. And in line with the question that we earlier had about solar panels, just imagine that China decided they recognized that renewable energy was the hottest, best place to make money 10 years from now or 5 years from now, or even now. And so they would wipe out all the competitors. Well, they did the same thing with rare earth metals that they did with solar panels. They wiped out all the mine owners in America who were doing rare earth metals and all the mine owners elsewhere. They bankrupted them by dumping on the global market. They now have 90+% of the market, just like they do with solar panels. And it's time to end that yesterday. So whether it's GM or somebody else, GM's making a magnet factory, that's cool. We need to have rare earth metals mined outside of China and outside of China's control so that we have real supply chains for magnets and for other things that we're doing for cars and for everything we make needs rare earth metals. And we need to have that, Australia and elsewhere needs to be helpful in stepping up mining those things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try not to repeat questions from individuals until we get to more, with one exception, which is a question from John Anderson. China owns SSA, who operates US ports. Does anyone else see a supply chain problem here?
Yes. Anything, if you go way back, when China was first getting its plan, this is before Xi Jinping, by the way, they decided to control the Panama Canal by buying ports at both ends. And I had this OSM about that. And I thought, what the heck? I mean, are you kidding me? Who misses this move? Who doesn't understand the military importance and the commercial military importance of having choke control over the most important canal in the world, right? They have it still today. So they've done that in a lot of places now, not just in the Panama Canal. So I think anyone who's watching that company, or more importantly, the fake commercial expansion into ports so that they can be used by the military, the Chinese military, when they need that. The American defense group is not confused about this. And they're, I think the State Department is working pretty hard right now to block new BRI deals like that, whether they're in America or whether they're in Sri Lanka. So we need to undo those deals.
All right, next question is from Kai, who asks, do you think the vaccination mandate by governments will create real unrest, threatening societies, especially in Europe?
Well, combined with Russian misadventures, yes. I'm Barrett, you're the expert on that, but let me turn it back to you in a minute. So it's tough to have mandates of any kind. By the way, do you pay taxes? Because that's a mandate. I don't enjoy paying taxes, by the way. I hate it. And I don't agree with everything that's done with my tax money. I would rather only give a third of that money and then not spend it on things that were unneeded. But I don't get to vote on that. It's a mandate. Guess what? That's what governments do. And I personally think that when you have a pandemic, which is killing 5 to 10 million people worldwide, you shouldn't have an option of whether you feel like you want to or not. You should protect others, including your family, by getting vaccinated. I'm happy to give up my rights that way. But now I'm going to turn this over to you, Barrett. If you were Putin, would you use your misinformation machine to make all of us mad about it?
So I've seen a couple of questions in the chat from people asking someone asking if China and Russia were coordinating their efforts, which the answer is absolutely yes, in a very concerted way over the last 4 to 5 years, and they continue to and will continue to in misinformation online and offline in their efforts. I would also add that one thing that is very important is anytime you see, I see this all the time, any political issue, any hot button issue, any issue of identity is necessarily weaponized by Russian misinformation and by Chinese misinformation in different ways, right? So if you find yourself getting upset about something that you see online, think about how that information is being framed and think about why it is being framed in that absolutist way. And I think that the US media actually plays a very large role in this, because we have over many years developed a tendency to posit politics as a contest, a black or white, a binary. And so what you'll see are a lot of articles by major US media operations which fuel the same kind of political polarity and hatred and dislike. And this is not just happening on one side or the other, it's happening on both sides, right? So I see very liberal headlines and I see very conservative headlines, both of which are saying, like Congress, a lose for Republicans in Congress, right? Or a win for Democrats in Congress. It's not like that framing, I think, is just as problematic and just as much of an issue as the Russian misinformation, because in looking at misinformation, disinformation, the US media picks up a lot of those narratives and then runs with them. And where the disinformation and misinformation reach may be somewhat limited, that US media like Fox News, CNN, their reach is not limited. It's actually much bigger. And so what you'll see are those same threads that are being kind of like created or amplified by misinformation then make their way into the mainstream media. And that has huge implications for the way that people in the United States, the way that people in Europe think about each other, and the ways that they think about what it means to be a citizen of any country. That's my thought on that.
Mhm. Makes sense.
Anyways, next question. Where are we? Let's see. Robert Anderson asked, do you see implementation of smaller modular nuclear plants as adjunct to solar and wind?
Yes, absolutely.
I heard a question about this in a Wall Street Journal conversation about Japan yesterday with the ambassador of Japan, and they were asking whether they thought that would be a part of their strategy going forward, given sensitivity.
No.
They actually, the people who spoke in that session said yes.
I know, but I don't think that Fukushima was just too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Eric Jansen asks, do you think that there will be an actual feet on the ground attack of Taiwan or an economic one that is not visible?
I think it's both, but it won't be the economic. I mean, it's already economic, but what I think you'll see, as we're seeing in Ukraine, is a constant increase in military pressure. We're already seeing it. So there's constant invasions of multiple airplanes, 40 airplanes, 25 airplanes, jets, bombers, fighters coming illegally into Taiwanese airspace, constantly forcing the Taiwanese to scramble jets and so forth. And they get like weary of it, and they assume that it's all part of a it's not paranoia. It's really part of a plan to get defense intelligence in line for the invasion. And it'll be happening with boats. It's going to be happening with submarines. It's going to be happening with jet fighters and bombers and amphibious craft. And we just saw a gigantic exercise, so to speak, exactly where it would have to happen to leave the mainland of China and go after the first two islands that are jumping points toward Taiwan. And, no one missed the message, but these exercises are real. And so my thinking about how they plan to do this is to terrify Taiwan and just keep bringing the pressure up until the head is unelected, right? You won't have a president who's in favor of a free Taiwan. The people will be so afraid, I think, that mainland Chinese think that they will elect someone who wants to join instead of having a war. And that will be the result of overwhelming terror through military pressure, combined with carrots, a lot of carrots.
Paul Wolfowitz, this is kind of a comment and a question in one. He says, thanks for mentioning Chechnya. Why doesn't anyone explain Putin's motive for poisoning Litvinenko with polonium? Paul, would you like to mention Putin's motive for poisoning? You're still here? Okay, we'll come back to that one.
Oh, well, if he's not here, I'll just do one sentence on it. I believe that Putin, there are two things. There's a thug in every Putin, and there's a delight in destroying your enemies most publicly with things that are only available to Putin. Novichok, polonium. So he doesn't want to hide the thing. He wants to make sure that all of Russia's enemies and friends and his own employees and his own army are completely aware that he will kill them if they embarrass him in any part of the world. He loves telling that story and making it happen. So that's what a thug does. And he is the world's biggest thug.
But Mark, the reason I asked the question, sorry,
yeah,
is that there's so little coverage of what happened. But Litvinenko wrote a whole book explaining that the FSB was behind the bombings very conclusively.
Ah, okay. Didn't know that. What's the
book?
Called
Blowing Up Moscow.
What's it called?
I think it's called Blowing Up Moscow.
Wow. Thanks. I'll have to read it.
Evan, would you mind finding that title and dropping it in the chat if you get a chance?
Can do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
So Raleigh Cole asks, what about non-China crypto? Comments on Bitcoin, Ethereum, or all the more specialized coins?
I'm going to defer to Evan on that one. He follows crypto much more than I do. I do think that there will be mundane uses of blockchain that are, banks and various, lotteries, all kinds of things. But crypto, Evan?
Sorry, one second. I was dropping that link in there. I'll ask for a restate of the question. 1 second.
What do you think of crypto? Bitcoin, Ethereum?
What do I think of it?
Yeah. Where is it going? I think. What is the role of non-Chinese crypto? Essentially, was the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's kind of two things happening. One, it's speculative. That's kind of obvious. Hence, all the price volatility and the et cetera. And it was for a long time. And there are reasons that it was a good idea to be an early speculator in cryptocurrency because there was actually some oomph to it technologically. It's not a made up product, which is, I think, what a lot of people thought at first. It actually does employ some interesting, technological approaches to decentralizing finance. I always was very critical of the idea that you were going to create some sort of anarcho crypto state. That struck me as rather dumb because I don't think national governments will allow it. And that's kind of what we've seen, right? So what you actually end up with is, I think any smart person looking at crypto now, if you're invested in Ripple, for instance, now you're dealing with the SEC. And so you're looking at Ripple getting targeted by the SEC, maybe for good reason, maybe for bad. They're going to fight the lawsuit. It's a big, giant roller coaster ride. And if you've got money in that asset, you will either make a lot of money when they get cleared by the SEC, or you will lose a lot of money when they do not. Meanwhile, national governments are already going to make their own cryptos, which Ripple has kind of half pivoted into doing that for them. I think they just had an announcement on Twitter a couple of days ago that they're going to be helping somebody like Palau, release a digital whatever. So on that front, I think you will not see the kind of libertarian future that some early crypto people were advocating for. It's just going to be another tool in the toolkit, and governments will use it for fast transactions. I think one of the biggest implications where there's money to be made is things like replacing the SWIFT system, right? That's a important but old and not very quick system for transferring money. So if you can do that in a secure fashion, which is not guaranteed in crypto at all yet, and all the most secure exchanges, there's a reason people use cold storage wallets, because all the most secure exchanges still tend to get hacked. But if you can do that in a secure fashion, and that is achievable, and that's a tech question, which I'm not qualified to answer, then you can get a lot of efficiency out of moving money faster. Now, you might have some liquidity moving too fast issues at that point. That's a whole nother place we can go, with a whole book. But I think in terms of, is it going to be useful and valuable in the future? The answer is yes. In terms of who's going to benefit and which one will be useful, it's a much more complicated question. So I won't get into, picking names out of a hat or anything, but I think when people are looking from a standard investment ROI kind of standpoint, and there are a lot of people on Wall Street now involved, when they're looking at these things, that's what they're trying to figure out. Is this coin going to be more useful than the next one? Is this tech that they're employing on the platforms or the ledgers behind it better than the others? And will it enable the kinds of things I just talked about? And I don't think anyone anymore is thinking about, creating a completely new monetary future that really is tracking this stuff.
Now, Evan, don't forget the term absolute insecurity.
Yeah.
So, Barrett, we're almost done here, I think.
Yeah, we are over time. Do you want to take one last question?
Sure, one more.
It's a change of scene. And it comes from Raleigh Cole, who asks, are we on the brink of major life extension, health extension, if only for the very rich at first? And what implications, especially if used by Putin and Xi?
Used by Putin and Xi. I was liking the question until you got to the end. I think we are. I was never a big believer in the early days of that movement. Biology is very complex. And this system, in the good old days, life expectancy was 37 years on the savannas of Siberian Africa. So we've gone way beyond that already. But at some point, the evolution process needs to be working well to help you along. It's not just going to be one drug. And so can you accelerate that? Yeah. And we already have, I think. We're doing it now. But there will be major jumps, and we're making them. I would phrase this differently. People die of something. and they always did. And so the point of medicine, in some sense, is to keep them from dying of those things. I mean, pattern computer, we're fighting it. We're trying to move the needle on the top 5 cancer killers. Well, that would be good. So maybe less people will die of that. And I think that the real answer has to do with medicine and healthcare. And back to what I was saying in this earlier program, that we'll see more advances in healthcare thanks to AI and to the discoveries we make through advanced mathematics than we've ever seen. The inadvertent effect of which will be to extend life.
All right.
With that,
thank you, Mark.
and I want to thank you and Evan. I'm very proud to have such smart kids.
Thank you.
Well done.